One of the topics that I constantly see brought up from the people from the manosphere is just how entitled and spoiled and uncompassionate women are. By this, of course, they mean women in the West because most of them have never lived in a developing country with traditional values as the dominant culture. Many of these men ended up being MGTOWs because they just don't see how things can be changed because they believe that being entitled and spoiled, even violent, is the nature of women. Now, I know this is not all MGTOWs. Some simply think that it's just the situation of the culture and the laws derived from it that are stuck, nothing directed at women in particular. But many MGTOW men I have encountered do. As I've said in my previous video, I come from uh, two very different cultures, so I have perspective from both sides, from what I've seen and also personal experience. I am quite convinced that no, it's not the nature of women to be spoiled brats. It is how the Western culture raised these women from very young to be like this. Paul Elam from A Voice and Ear for Men has made numerous videos teaching men how to tame spoiled women in a relationship. And those are very good videos. I encourage you to watch them. But I think the root of the problem started with how you Westerners raise your little girls. And I would like to share some perspective from my personal experience with you growing up in China. There are actually men propagating how the solution for Western men is to find a traditional East Asian wife, as they've seen how nice they are compared to the liberal Western women. Paul Elam even made a video just dedicated to this topic. Like Paul Elam, I do not recommend this as some kind of solution, and I will go into why maybe in another video. There is a lot of truth to what you see regarding the nice family oriented East Asian women that many men find desirable and attractive. And let me tell you why, on the average, we do tend to be less spoiled than Western women. Both of my parents work full time, having me. My mother, of course, took on the traditional role of the primary child care. However, that didn't stop her from getting her advanced degrees and eventually becoming a professor. She did this by doing something that Western mothers wouldn't dare think about doing to their children, especially daughters. She does not make me her only priority. As soon as I was old enough to walk and run around, I would go outside unsupervised, finding kids my own age and play with all sorts of stuff that could be potentially dangerous. My mother, of course, wasn't completely neglecting me, but there was never a no, honey, don't touch that, that's gonna hurt you from her. Eventually, around 3 or 4, the curiosity got the best of me and I broke my arm. My mother rushed me to the hospital and, of course, cared for me until my arm was healed. I remember that when I went to the hospital, there was a bit of people smiling and laughing at me, like, oh, stupid kid's done it again. There wasn't a single person coming to me and tell me just how sorry he or she was that I broke my arm. When I entered elementary school, my mother stopped taking me to school and picking me up from school like she does every day when I went to kindergarten. I was expected to walk about 20 minutes by myself carrying my backpack to school and then was expected to come back home in the evening, again carrying my backpack on my own and walk home. Of course, they did encourage that you have a buddy to walk to school with you, but if you don't, you are expected to make it to school and make it home by yourself. No parental supervision was required. Now, Chinese schools are a bit different from the schools in the West. The schools do not provide lunch, so you are expected to go home, eat lunch, and take a nap during noontime for a total about 2 hours. My mother, however, works full time, so she works during the day. So she found a solution. The kindergarten during that time has like a daycare service just for first graders during noontime. I think maybe even second graders, but definitely first graders. This is a place where they will provide lunch and also a room for the kids to take the nap. So my mother signed me up for it. Of course, I hated the idea and I told her I don't want to go. She went ahead and did it anyways. So for at least the first year, maybe even the second, again, I don't quite remember, every day at noon I was expected to walk to the daycare center about 10 to 15 minutes away by myself, and then, of course, walk back to school again by myself. The daycare center really sucked. The teachers were really mean. If you're late, for example, you would get into serious trouble. I mean, they can beat you. Yes, that means girls too. And if you missed lunch, you're not gonna get lunch again. The food really sucked. It was served from something like a trash can, and we didn't have real beds. We were made to sleep in the cribs left unused by the kindergartners. I remember being extremely angry at my mother for doing this to me. I yelled at her, I cried at her, I told her that she didn't love me and I felt abandoned. I begged her to let me come home. And you know what she told me? Shut up, stop whining, and get yourself to the daycare center. I'm not at home and I can't take care of you in that time. It's just a short time, so stop being pathetic. She told me this when I was 7 years old. Now, when I tell this story to any of my Western friends, they're usually incredibly shocked, right? I mean, how my mother treated me would be considered child abuse in, for example, the US, and maybe, who knows, she probably could have been arrested. But this is the philosophy in the Chinese society. Children have to learn to grow up really fast. Some of my Western friends would ask, maybe this was during a time and place where it's just somehow so safe for children to run around unsupervised. I lived on a university campus which provides housing for families and also elementary and eventually middle schools. So, yes, compared to the outside of the campus, it's much safer, but I can assure you that it's not more safe than many Western suburban neighborhoods. You know, people can still come in and out and kidnap children if they plan on doing it. It wasn't the safety, it was the philosophy that children need to go out and learn to fall and pick themselves up on their own. Now, when people ask me, well, weren't you scared, going to school and coming back on your own? And this is when I think back and I just kind of went like, I never thought about it. I never thought about uh, accompanied by my parents to go to school and then they have to pick me up. It was just something perfectly natural. It was a natural thing for us to do on our own. And this was the same when I started violin lessons. The teacher, my violin teacher, was on the other side of the campus, so the walk was around 30 to 40 minutes in the evening. So every day of that week, I carry my violin and walk by myself to the teacher's house to take my lesson. My mother did pick me up after I was done because it would be quite late at night and very dark, so she wasn't going to let me walk home in the dark all by myself. And this is how I grew up, just doing things, running around on my own in this campus, climbing buildings, climbing trees, exploring caves, hills, ponds, etc. Many times with friends, but also many times on my own. When I first learned to ride a bike, for example, there was no parental supervision. I was actually learning it from another older kid, and I broke my lip falling from the bike. I was taken to the hospital, that's it. Once I got too close to the edge of a small cliff and I fell from it. It was quite a miracle that I didn't break anything. Again, no parental or adult supervision. I remember screaming in pain, but nobody was running towards me because nobody could hear me. So I actually had to pick myself up, limping to go back to the school, hoping that I didn't miss a class or something, or I would be in serious trouble. I did tell a couple classmates about it, but I didn't dare to tell the teacher because, again, I would be in serious trouble because I was not supposed to be at that place. Yes, in China, if you hurt yourself because it's your fault, most likely you'll be punished. usually by shaming you in front of all your classmates just how stupid you are. Someone I know works at a daycare center where I live now. Um, she gave me an idea of how kids are treated in the US. Let's just say that it's now my turn to be shocked. Apparently, the norm in the daycare center is that anything bad the kid has done, it's the teacher's fault. So there would be kids who would hit teachers, but if the teacher tells this to the kid's mother, she would then blame the teacher for not doing her job. In China, if a parent hears of her kid acting like this, most likely the kid would get a nice beating. In this daycare center she works in, if a kid is being violent to another kid, which happens a lot, you're not supposed to let the parents of the perpetrating kid know, because the parents might confront each other, and that's somehow bad. And of course, you're not supposed to hit the kid. From what I've heard, the bad kids who have this kind of bad behavior tend to be girls, and I suspect it's because boys were given better discipline by the parents. But girls are all precious princesses, and it's the adult's fault that she's bad, and you're just not doing your job to calm her down, and you as a teacher will get a nice scolding from the parents if you report anything negative about this precious little princess of yours. Is it really a surprise then that the girls in this country and also in the rest of the Western world will grow up to be entitled bitches? Is it any surprise that they don't grow up to be real adults when they're catered to from such a young age and taught to not be responsible for their own actions? Now, I'm not necessarily saying you should raise your girls like how my mother raised me or any Chinese mother raised their daughter, but there are a few things that you can do to ensure they grow up to be better women. And I mean way better. Number one, learn to say no to your daughter. And by this, I don't mean a half-hearted no, really a big, firm, even angry no when she wants something that you don't see the need for her to have. Even if she gives a big tantrum, you need to make it clear that if she goes on like this, she will be in trouble, so she understands that she won't always get her way in life and then get away with it. In China, the philosophy is even the other way around. The children are supposed to serve the parents. There's a class that you have to take in elementary school. It's called Thinking and Ethics, where it's kind of like the equivalent of the American churches, where you're taught how to be a good person. So every class we read a story that's supposed to teach you something. And one of the story was about a little girl who was promised by her parents to go to the park, but on the day where she was supposed to go, her parents changed their minds because of work. And the moral of that story that we were told was the girl was supposed to be understanding towards her parents and yield to their wishes. Most of the time, when I see Western parents with little girls and she's giving a tantrum because she didn't get what she wanted, she gets comforted. The mother will go like, "It's okay, shh, 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 honey, you'll get it next time, don't cry, shh." When you do that, the message that you're sending to your daughter is, "My feels are important, you need to come from me when they get hurt." I've given several tantrums at my parents growing up. Each time I cried my heart out. I screamed my voice out. My parents just went ahead and told me how pathetic I was and how I don't know what's right and wrong and how angry they are with me. Let me in on you with a little secret. Kids may look like they suffer a lot, but they get over it really fast. You need to get over this over-exaggerated instinct of pedocentrism. Yes, that's a word that I just made up. This is one of the reasons why I care more about adults suffering than children. It is very important for children in their developmental age to get over tantrums and to understand that not only she can't always get what she wants, but she needs to be more understanding and sympathetic towards other people and be able to put herself in other people's shoes. I was a kid who gets pissed off really easily. When I tell people this now, they just get really surprised because now I hardly ever get pissed off, or at least, on the surface, and people get really surprised, like I'm such a calm person when I tell them this. This is because growing up, my mom constantly told me how I should be more like the other kids who don't get pissed off so easily, and how I was being pathetic and how I was being stupid. You don't need to go this extreme, but your little girl needs to be told how this behavior is not acceptable and will not help her go far in life. Number two, make her learn the value of possessions. One of the big differences I see in how parents in the West spoil their kids, especially girls, is buying them anything they want. I worked as a babysitter for a family during high school, and oh my gosh, their toys were so numerous that they literally filled up an entire room. In fact, there was barely any room to walk around. I think Western parents have this idea that toys are good for kids. It stimulates their imagination and creativity, so they should be playing as much as possible in their childhood. No, there's absolutely no evidence that a kid's intelligence and creativity is predicted by how many toys they have. When you just go and buy any toy your daughter sees on the shelf, the idea you give her is ask and thou shalt receive. Kids are incredibly creative with just anything they own, and it's important to teach them anything they own is precious and must be earned. Buy your daughters gifts during big events, like, for example, her birthday or Christmas. The rest of the time, only buy toys for her as, let's say, rewards. So she cleaned up after herself for a whole month. She got straight A's in school. She went and did extraordinary community service, etc. This will teach her that possessions are valuable. When I grew up, having toys was a luxury, and kids will envy you for it. If you have a single doll, you're like a queen. One of my father's ex-students, um, he graduated, when he graduated, bought a big, pretty doll. You know, looks expensive for that time, and he gave it to my father because he knew that my father had a very young daughter as a thank you gift because my father was his advisor. That very young daughter was me, obviously. The doll was kept in a transparent plastic bag, and my dad basically told me to not touch it and leave it sitting in a plastic bag on top of a bookshelf. You know, it was a funny tale because even then I thought, hey, that looks like that's something for me. But my father adamantly told me to not take it out of the bag. I think he thought that I was not worthy of such a pretty thing. There was a happy ending with that tale because eventually I went back to China. I found the doll still sitting in a plastic bag which has been covered in the thick layer of dust. So my dad was inadvertently being smart because that doll was as good as new when I took it out of the dirty bag. And I carried it back on the plane with me while my mom was giggling, and but she said nothing. Make the toys of your daughter precious to her, and she will value presents given to her by her future boyfriend or husband, and she will value possessions as something that she has to earn, not handed to her as entitlement. Last but not least, let your daughter get hurt, physically and mentally. Yes, you should make sure nothing life threatening is going to happen to your child, but understand that injuries that will heal well are good for her. Let her discover mistakes on her own unsupervised. Let her pick herself up when she falls down, let's say breaking her skin on the pavement. Let her go explore in the wild, climb on things, and fall. And when you treat her injuries, minimize your comforting her. Tell her that the wound will heal, but don't cradle her like she's made of glass. Because she isn't, and she needs to learn to get used to the idea that she isn't the mistress of the house who would just holler and the maid would just come running to her. This will help her become more independent when she grows up. One additional thing I've noticed is that your daughter will model herself after her parents. This is why I don't advocate for a quote unquote traditional family. Where the man is the sole financial provider and the woman is just the housewife and stay-at-home mom. Because your daughter will learn from this model to depend on men completely financially and entitled to a man's money. I am extremely grateful that I was brought up in a family with both full-time working parents. I'm also very privileged from this perspective because tuned income means I get to live in a very well-off lifestyle. Growing up, because both of my parents worked full time, I just took it for granted that if I ever get married, I was supposed to work to give my half of the share of the total family income. I never imagined myself to depend on the man financially, and the idea of it's ridiculous to me. Make the mother of your children, especially your daughter, work and contribute to at least close to half of the family income, and your daughter will grow up to be a more responsible woman. If enough people in the West is willing to reform how they raise their daughters and stop spoiling them, you will be much more likely to solve the problem of the men's issues and preventing the feminist apocalypse.